I'm not sure what I expected when I went into Elemental. I guess probably a very pretty, experimental game about nature. You'd think by now I would have learned to look at tags before I jumped into things blind. Alright, let's not start your education the same way. Elemental is a puzzle platformer with some of the most interesting mechanics that I've ever seen. It's got a very nice aesthetic, some interesting sound design, and I think there's a story nebulously going on in the background. Alright, let's start with the story. It's odd. I really don't understand what happened. I think it was meant to be a metaphor about awareness, life, and love? Maybe. And if it was, I have no idea how that connects to what's going on in the game. My evidence for this theory in the levels is that random parts of the background music, you'll hear random ghostly, disembodied voices, and their eerie presence drifting past just enough to unsettle you before you travel on again as the more classic soundtrack sets back in for you to enjoy until you doubt yourself if it ever really happened. There might even still be hidden information I don't have, too. In each level, there's 2 balls of black energy that are difficult to get to. You need good mastery of the controls to gather them, as well as strong awareness of what's coming up in the level. As a result, I only ever collected 1. There's every chance that more is revealed to you if you've collected enough of them, which is fully legitimate. As it stands, I have 2 things to say about the story. Firstly, it's very pretty, and it makes a nice pause and reward for your efforts. I like it. However, be careful, illusions. Quoting your own game comes across as exceedingly pompous and arrogant. This is amplified when placed alongside quotes from figures like Einstein and Helen Keller that you're quoting a non-speaking game that I am currently playing. It's not a big deal, but you're on really thin ground there. Watch it. Now let's settle into something less nebulous, the mechanics. Each arrow key on your keyboard transforms you into a different element. Down is a small rock that helps you drop and provides downward momentum. Up is a light air bubble that can help you float through the air and provides a limited amount of upwards momentum. Right is a ball of fire that accelerates quickly towards the right in an arc. Finally, left is your main mode of travel, a cube of ice that slides along the ground. You carry the momentum from the other forms to glide throughout the level. You use your other forms to overcome the various obstacles and to build up speed for your ice form. Once you have the mechanics down, this feels wonderful. When I finished the game and went back to the first race level, it felt amazing to be swapping forms quickly and applying everything that I'd learned to make that level that had once confused me and taken me almost 6 minutes fly by in a mere 83 seconds. Some of the level puzzles are quite a lot of fun too. New mechanics are introduced just as fast to keep things challenging, and when you've seen everything that there is to see, start layering on types of small challenges into large, more complex levels. I think the only mechanic that was never utilized beyond its introduction was the idea that the bubble will float safely above the surface of lava. That's never necessary for any puzzle after its introduction, and only in the final level did I ever want to use it. And in that one level is when it's suddenly a non-existent mechanic, of course. This isn't to say the game isn't without its issues. Communication to the player is a very large one of those. When I was in the starting area and could only be a bubble and a block of ice, I got a message about bunny hopping is encouraged, and I had no idea whatsoever what that meant. I was actually much deeper into the game before I figured out I could turn into fire and back into ice to build up forward momentum. Then even later I realized that I could bubble and do the same thing upwards, but it was even harder. That's part of the risk of being a mostly silent game, so overall it's a minor nitpick. I was able to figure it out eventually, and I'll admit, sometimes I can be a bit slow on these things. What was far more frustrating is the collision glitches. If I had $1 for every time my flame blew up without seeming to have touched anything or too early despite me doing the exact same thing every time, I could afford a better computer. You can press the same buttons in the exact same timing, and sometimes things will work perfectly, and sometimes they won't. It wasn't uncommon for my bubble to bounce off solid walls without popping, instead rebounding into the new direction with significant force. Likewise, bouncing against firewalls as the spark, something which is supposed to turn you around in the other direction in the same way as the bubbles were in the glitch, caused me to die as if I had struck a solid wall, or even to just stop rebounding very slightly and dropping down instead. There were all the times when, despite turning into ice being stated not to cause energy, I couldn't turn into ice when I pressed left, seemingly because my energy bar was too empty. There's no explanation, and if I kept hammering the button, it would turn a moment later, assuming I was alive, but by then it's often too late and the puzzle has failed and I have to build up momentum again. This would be less frustrating if the penalty for failure was less awful. Now let me defend the game against myself for a moment. The checkpoint system is actually pretty reliable, and every time that it brought me deeply back into a level from where I'd been to a checkpoint, I could usually understand why it had done so. But there's also several times too many that the checkpoints are horrible. Some checkpoints feel like they almost render the level unplayable as you struggle to overcome the obstacle that you died to because you didn't know what was coming up and you didn't react perfectly. That's also very common, that you just need to sort of predict what's coming and how you'll need to react once you have your momentum going. If you're moving slowly enough to read what's just come on screen and respond, you won't make it. If you're going fast enough to make it, you don't have time to see what's happening until it's too late, if you don't already know what you're going to expect. This isn't always a problem. Many levels are set up perfectly, but many others are set up awfully with no telegraphing of what you should expect. Lost track of my own point there for a second. Sometimes you will end up at a checkpoint, whether because of poor telegraphing or your own failures, and you'll just sort of be stuck. You'll die over and over as you try to progress until you get the prompt, H for help. And when you press H, you'll watch Mr. Smooth sail through the level with perfect momentum and speed. You cannot get that momentum because you died. So you can't do it that way because you can no longer get that momentum. But that's your fault. This is all the help you're getting. They really needed to make Mr. Smooth recognize what your checkpoint was and put in actual help from that checkpoint. Otherwise, it just feels like Mr. Smooth is taunting you as he flies beautifully past, doing what you no longer can, as you desperately flap your clipped wings just trying to climb up a chain link fence. The checkpoints have another huge frustration that I'm somewhat shocked was overlooked as well. If you make it past the first obstacle or two, but don't make it to the next checkpoint before you die again, you can forget about making another attempt right away. The camera does not come back to the checkpoint before you spawn at the checkpoint. Gravity and such starts affecting you as soon as you've spawned, but you can't change forms or move right away. The game always starts by transforming you into a rock slightly above the ground to try and help you build up momentum. But even if you could interact, you don't know when you've spawned to time your transformations, so have to guess and mash. Yes, the smooth glide back to the checkpoints looks nicer than a sudden jump, but it's unbelievably frustrating to realize I already spawned and am now sitting on the ground as a rock, all potential momentum gone. Guess I just have to press R and restart at the checkpoint and take another death onto my final tally. Overall, it feels to me like the devs were really good at their game and knew exactly what was coming at every point because they were the devs. So they never deliberately died to continue from their checkpoints. They never deliberately failed repeatedly, mid-mission, mid-challenge, in order to see what effects the checkpoints had and how to progress from those checkpoints. At least enough to recognize these small but deeply significant problems. Because that's the big thing about Element. They're only a problem, relatively speaking, once. After you've overcome the challenge and have a better idea of what to expect, you'll be able to do it better. And the next time will be better. And the next time will be better until the challenge isn't getting past the puzzle and is instead beating yourself. And that's really the point of the game. One of the prominent options on the main screen is race mode, and that feels like the heart and soul of the game, pushing yourself to be faster and faster. If you get stuck and would need a checkpoint, just restart the level and don't sacrifice the time. I'm not great at the game, and I still found myself naturally slipping into that mentality as I played through that first level again. There was always 2 ghosts in my race, my best time and the time of someone who'd done comparable to my best time, but a little bit better. You can use their ghosts to see what they did and help improve. By the time that I brought my times down and practiced a couple times, I had my time down to 70 seconds. I thought I was the man. Yeah, sure. There were places I could improve, but I did great. So I glanced over to the side, and I looked at that high score sheet, and I saw the top time. 17 seconds. For a moment, I was simply stunned. But the more I look back on it, the more I smile. I'm clearly not great, but it still felt good. It felt like I was awesome. And all the frustration and the tough learning moments and the puzzles I felt like I'd just gotten lucky on, they didn't matter in that moment when I felt awesome. And even outside the racetrack mode, you'll have those moments. You'll finally get through the puzzle section you've been stuck on for a minute or more, moving perfectly at each step, feeling as if everything is coming together. For that one moment, all of the frustration and the nerves at the maneuvers you need to pull off are washed away. And all that exists is you and the moment, and you can physically feel the shifts in momentum of your little element on the screen. And in that moment, it's worth everything that led up to it.
That's good. Oh, God. Oh, my God, cold.
Why'd you have to go the hard way?
Son of a bitch, you're still recording, aren't you?